Citizen Sleeper 2, Starward Vector, with Gareth, because I'm enjoying the game immensely, even though I hate how it makes me feel sometimes. And I'm I mean, you've added, I love the first game as well. And this one, you've added this stress system that gives me stress. and it's not usually a feeling that I seek out in games. And I'm wondering what your position is regarding putting the player into uncomfortable places. It seems like you certainly don't shy away from it. In fact, you are eager to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not necessarily looking to make the player uncomfortable, but looking to engage them, I think. And I think there's, difficulty is such a powerful way of engaging players, I think, when done right. And I think in the first Citizen Sleeper, I felt like I was very happy with the vibe of it. I think it has this very particular progression arc that I kind of worked on, where you're picking up you're trying to get this drug, the stabilizer, to for people who don't know, to like get yourself back up to the level, and then you start declining, and it's about the kind of tension of knowing that decline's coming, and knowing that, oh god, tomorrow is going to be worse than the day after that is going to, and that kind of gets you into the reason I'm doing that is not because I want to make the player miserable and put them in a decline. It's because I want to get them into this headspace, the emotional headspace of the sleeper, and therefore bring them into the world, right? Use that as a tool to bring them into the world. So for Citizen Sleeper 2, I really, I'm a big fan of stories about improvisers and about kind of like characters. I've never been really like a big superhero fan, I think, because I always like the idea of characters who aren't any more powerful than anybody else in the movie or the TV show, but they're just a bit luckier. Like the kind of Indiana Jones thing of like, he's never the biggest guy. He's never like the smartest guy, but he's the guy who somehow gets out. He somehow gets lucky, or maybe he's smart, but he's got this very specific kind of smarts that comes with kind of noirish storytelling. And pluck. I guess that's the kind of, pluck. Maybe he's the pluckiest guy. So I guess I'm asking you to be plucky in Citizen Sleeper 2, and kind of, I want the player to respond to like these stressful situations where they don't have full control, of everything that's happening. And we're used to in games having maybe the ability to like have an optimum outcome and almost like also an optimum setup, right? Like our perfect setup, everything's ready, we're ready to go, we're going to execute. And I wanted players to have to deal with, I haven't got enough, I'm not ready, I'm going to have to do this right now, and I know it's going to be bad, but I'm going to try and get through it, and I'm going to come out the other side, and we're going to keep going. And that's the kind of emotional journey I wanted for players. So that's what I'm trying to do to you.
No, it's exactly how I feel. And it's not like I said, oftentimes I go into games to live out the power fantasy, to feel OP, to feel like, this is awesome because I'm mowing down the enemies, or I'm leaping, the chasm, or whatever it is. And Citizen Sleeper, as you so well articulated, doesn't allow me to feel that way. I'm always in the first game too. I'm always feel like I don't quite have enough. I'm never quite where I want to be. And every decision is, I have to weigh every decision, and oh man, and failure is a big part of the game as well, which I think is a bold design decision, right? Because players don't like to fail, right? And you are asking players to fail in Citizen Sleeper 2 frequently, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm trying to make a deal with players, which is like, hey, don't worry, if you fail, I'm gonna make it interesting, and like it's just I want the players to come out of it with a story. And I think, in Citizen Sleeper 1, that story was about what path did you take through the Erlin's Eye? Like, who did you side with? What ending did you find? Who were your favorites? Like, I think for Citizen Sleeper 2, I wanted everyone to have a story where everybody at some point hit like real difficulty. They hit like it broke bad, basically. I wanted everyone to have this mechanical story, not just like a story that I'm narrating, but actually like a story that they're narrating as well, where they go on a contract and it doesn't quite work out. And then they realize like this is not going to play out well, and they have to try and make a call on on whether they, how they actually negotiate that circumstance. And then they kind of live through it. And I don't like fade to black and say, try again. And I don't give them a chance to roll back their save. And I say, okay, let's keep going, because that's now like the fuel for the bounce back, right? There's this phrase that ended up being really important for Citizen Sleeper 2 in development, which is the idea of bouncing back. That I want to give the player the opportunity to like bounce back against this difficulty and find their way to deal with it. And I felt like that was kind of just the emotional experience that I wanted, because that's the emotional experience of the sleeper in the game, which is kind of like, immediately on the run at the start of the game, immediately on the back foot. And that part, the initial part of the game is intentionally quite challenging to immediately try and set that expectation of like, hey, yeah, you're not going to get a perfect outcome. There's no perfect way through this thing, but, there's going to be a story, and it's going to be exciting, and it's going to, I'm a huge fan of Into the Breach. I don't know if you guys ever played Into the Breach.
I love that game. Yeah.
And the thing I love about Into the Breach is the way, rather than saying like, here's some enemies, how are you going to kill them? It says, here's a situation that's going to go, if you don't do anything, that building's getting destroyed. You're going to get this knocked off your power grid. This guy's going to die. This guy's going to die. What are you going to do about it? And then they put the emphasis on you, and you're trying to come up with, sometimes you can get the perfect setup, but you're trying to come up with a way in which you're trying to do that. And then sometimes you have to make hard decisions. You're like, okay, that skyscraper is going to have to come down because, that's the only thing I can do right now. And I don't have enough power in the power grid. And this is what I really wanted for Citizen Sleeper 2 is I love that game. I love the way that when you're playing Into the Breach, a lot of the game happens in your head. You click kind of quite rarely in a way, because you spend a lot of time just looking and thinking. And that's what I kind of wanted for Citizen Sleeper 2 is a game like that, but with way more narrative, way more storytelling, all the writing put on top of that to give it kind of like a slightly different feel to something like Into the Breach.
That bounce back notion that you were talking about, it feels very tabletop role playing game, right? As somebody who's done a lot of DMing myself, one of the hardest things for players, I think, to wrap their heads around is that failure is good, right? That it's an opportunity for storytelling, and that there's never been a good story in the history of time that didn't involve the main characters doing something wrong or failing in some way, because that's what the second act is about. Right? That's but I think it's a different notion, even more of a different notion, allowing a single person who's sitting in front of their computer to feel that and not feel like you're pushing them away from the game, communicating. And what I'm trying to say is I think that the Citizen Sleeper 2 in particular does such a good job of feeling like you've got me, right? Like you said, if I fail, or when I fail, there will be interesting things that come of it, and it's not something to recoil from or feel like I need to restore my save, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing, it totally is, drawing on that tabletop idea. And there's this piece of DMing advice, which I'm sure you've heard, which is like, be a fan of the players, right? And I always really like this. And I think that's what I try to do in Citizen Sleeper, is I try to give this sense of like, okay, yeah, I'm going to push you. I'm going to push hard. There's going to be times when like, you're not going to see how you're going to get out of the situation. But I want you to. I don't want you to fail. I want you to actually overcome that and step over it and find that path through. And I'm giving you tools, right? Like the lowest chance in Citizen Sleeper is a 50-50, even with a 1. And my trick in the game is like, I make that feel bad to like, a 1 looks really scary. And then when you put the 1 in the action and the game's like, yeah, this is scary. This is a scary moment. Hit that button, see what happens. But at the end of the day, it's a 50-50. If you're playing XCOM, you might have like a 20% shot, but they don't do anything to make that 20% shot feel bad, right? They just kind of like, 20% or 95%, it's all presented the same way. And because of that, I think they sometimes, you just go for a 20% shot because you're like, yeah, whatever, it's 20% shot. That sounds pretty good. People are so crazy with probability sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
And we get bug reports where people are like, you're cheating the dice. And it's like, nope, it's just dice, just probability, my friend. There's no cheating. But yeah, it's that thing of like, I want to engage with the emotional aspect of dice. And I think that's something I really learned from tabletop gaming, is like, dice have this incredible ability to represent everything from like your own internal capabilities, like the character's capabilities, can I do this, versus the world pushing against you, like can this be done, and versus just a wider idea of like fate or chance, or like, you know, is this what's supposed to happen, or like how, you know, how can we negotiate that? And it just plays into me something that's actually like very core to human experience is we, you know, we all have these like series of experiences, and at the end of the day we like come home and we tell somebody a story about like, this is what happened to me today and this is what it means. I really love that. So that's kind of, I'm trying to engage with that in video games, and that's the kind of, it's not like I have all the answers. For me, that's the experiment of Citizen Sleeper. That's what it's been about. It's been about, how can I bring this over into video games, this thing that I think is really special in tabletop, and that can totally be part of video games too.
That's awesome.
I think for games for so long, too, just the term or idea of failure has meant something very specific that is different than other forms of storytelling, where
it means game over.
Yeah, it means literal game over, and it means more money in, that you need to, you know, pay more, or you've lost time now because you got to redo. I failed trying to take down that monster in Monster Hunter Wilds. Now I need to do it again, and it is punitive. And I think, you know, Jeff, you mentioned in storytelling, Act 2, it's not, you hit Act 2 and it's like, well, show's over. Deborah went the wrong way. She got murdered by the monster. Failed.
Hands in carbonite, man. That's that's it. What are we going to do now?
Over. End of story. And seeing, not only from a narrative standpoint, overcoming setback or challenge, I'm trying to use a different term, but I think, Gareth, as you're attempting or doing in Citizen Sleeper 2, and I think a fair amount in Citizen Sleeper 1 as well.
It's interesting, though, in the first one, I felt like by the end of the game, I was pretty powerful, and I didn't have that stress. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Christian, but I just think it's interesting that there's been a progression, I think, into the second game. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, the idea of making grit a mechanic instead of a fail state. And a lot of times games have that grit moment, or getting over something or overcoming something as a cutscene. You know, your character does something epic, and then a truck blasts through the wall and they're hanging and they're gonna, you know, and that's the overcome moment. And how they can make, how games can make the player involved in that and make that exciting. You know, when I'm playing a tabletop game, most of the time, a lot of our fun comes from whoopsie daisies, not, oh, I rolled this, I got this, here we go. And I love seeing that in games, even though I talked about last week in Citizen Sleeper 2, I definitely feel the anxiety of like, this is a crap situation. But I think it's fascinating from a design perspective of games and narrative, and how you can make that mechanic or that experience playable and interactive, which is the hallmark of games, and not something that you just observe.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's also been the process between Citizen Sleeper 1 and 2, is like trying to calibrate, you know, Citizen Sleeper 1 was an initial experiment in that mode and bringing certain ideas over, like I was, you know, super interested in bringing clocks over from tabletop, and clocks became really important to Citizen Sleeper because that's something that I loved using at the table. I love putting a clock down without a name in front of my players, and then just start ticking it up when things happen as a consequence, and just watching them freak out because they have no idea what's going to happen when this clock gets filled. As I said earlier, I am a trickster of a DM, but the you know, that was, so I started to introduce that, right? Dice, clocks. But for me, one of the things I wanted to do was take some, maybe try and reach a bit wider to players who need like more mechanical aspects to get into the role playing, who need to be pushed actually, who are too good at min-maxing. And I wanted to kind of test those people and try and encourage them to engage with what I'm proposing to them. So I know that sometimes like that's not going to land, and definitely, you know, it can be, it's not like players, I'm not like looking at players and being like, oh, you didn't engage with this, like that's your failing. It's like it's an experiment, and it's something I'm trying to figure out, and it's a process that, you know, can be, I can't balance the game for everybody. I'm trying really hard to DM the game for thousands of people from a great distance.
Crazy.
But you know, I think that's what I'm most happy with in Citizen Sleeper 2 is when I play it, I still have moments where I'm like on a contract and I'm like, like I did the anniversary stream, and I wasn't really anniversary release stream on Steam, and I wasn't really paying attention, and I just like chucked a dice in action and hit go, and I was like, the moment I saw that had failed and what it had done, I saw, okay, it was stress there, one stress there, and he suddenly did some calculations, and I was like, oh, I'm so screwed now. Like I just passed the Rubicon. Like it just, and and I made the game. So for me, that's the kind of thing that I get excited about systems and the way they can talk, and the way that they can help tell a story, I think is really fun. And it's always a balance for me because I'm not a super systemic. I'm not like a big sim player, and I don't want to make like just sim stuff, but I find my inspirations come from kind of opposite ends, and I often find myself a little disappointed that like, oh, this quite narrative game it doesn't use more systems to tell its story, or this sim game doesn't really like have a good enough story. It's like when the systems play out, it's like actually it's a bit dry, there's no characters, and there's very few games in between that kind of do both. And so I guess that's a space that I find myself exploring. Totally. I mean, I think War Tales is an interesting game that's kind of in that zone if you've played that.
I like that game a lot. Yeah.
And I remember in that game, like I got this was like early in the development of Citizen Sleeper 2. I played that game and I like recruited a wolf, while I was exploring, and this wolf became like an integral part of my team of like mercenaries as we were going around. And then one battle, I realized that like I had a choice. We'd messed up and it was going to be the wolf that was going to die, or it was going to be one of my team. And I realized like, okay, the wolf is going to be the one that dies. And they do this beautiful thing in War Tales where the wolf's body becomes an item in your inventory. And if you use it, you can put a little grave in the world, and you can get your keyboard and you can type whatever you want like on that grave. And so I took this wolf to like a nice little spot by a tree, by a stream, and I buried it and I wrote its name on the grave. And that was all systems, right? At no point did the game like lean in and try and tell me that story.
Right.
And that for me is really powerful. And for me, I guess personally, I want to just lean in just a little bit. I want to do that DM thing of just like describing the water and the tree and the weather on that day when you bury the wolf, right? That's where for me that there's that little bit of juice that could just be injected in there. So I'm always kind of playing in that zone, I think.
I just love hearing you talk about it. It's fascinating, and you're so articulate about it. It really makes me excited that you're working in this space, and I can't wait to see your long career continue. Very, very cool stuff.